my first and last. And and I didn't have a first kiss.
You didn't?
Back that day and age, people didn't kiss and.
Okay.
Oh.
Sorry, don't mean to embarrass you.
Well, I'll tell you, it's hard to describe what it was like back when I was growing up. It was a lot different from what it is now, I'll tell you.
Oh, yeah. Had to be.
We were poor people, poor country people, and didn't have very much. But we were lucky enough we had a little more than some people had, even back then. My daddy, and my mother married she was real young. And her father had left my grandmother when she was a baby. And my daddy was a hard worker and a savings man. He saved everything he could, and he and his brother. At that time, he had one brother and one sister, and they rented a farm together and had one row right down the middle of it that separated their crops. My uncle's was on one side, my daddy's on the other. And he split the rails himself that fenced in the place. He also, and I remember watching him do part of it, he also cut trees down and what do you call it? Anyway, he made strips about that wide, and he made baskets, and he wove all them himself. And gosh, I'll have to think back. And when they gathered the crops, they only had a one-horse wagon, each one of them. That's all they could afford. And when they carried the cotton to gin, they both have to go. It was a one-horse wagon, and it wouldn't hold a bale of cotton. They'd each take a half. Each time, any of them had to go to the gin. That's the way they did it. And my father-in-law, your granddaddy's father, they lived about 4 miles from us. And your granddaddy was the first, and we went to the same school, country school, one-room schoolhouse in the beginning, but it was later made into 2 rooms. And your granddaddy started letting me know that he was interested. Back then, we wore bonnets to school and carried our lunch in a lunch basket. And at the end of the day, the school teacher would let the boys hand out the coats and the bonnets. And he would always slip a pack of chewing gum in my bonnet. That let me know. And we'd play at recess and lunchtime. I forgot what they call it. Whip. Oh, whatever. Anyway, we joined hands, and I forgot what they call it now. But he'd make it his point to be next to me to hold on to my hand.
So you like to see the arms.
And he'd walk halfway. I went one direction and he went the other direction. But he'd walk halfway home with me and carry my books. I know you can't imagine anything like that.
I can can picture it. The two of you walking down a dirt road together, halfway home, he's carrying the books with you.
And finally, and we'd play what they call stick frog. We'd pitch a knife, and at recess and dinner, he always cornered me off with a knife, and we'd sit there and talk and play stick frog.
What's stick frog like? You throw the knife?
Yeah, throw the knife and see if it could make it stick up in the dirt.
Okay.
We were sitting on the dirt out in the little wooded, little tree section by the schoolyard. And finally he said, "Let's get married." I said, "You know well and good we are too young to get married." I was about 14 at that time. And he said, "Well, you aren't too young to tell me." And I never did say yes. But we started dating a little, and then, I don't know, he decided, I guess he decided he had to play around a little and see if he found anybody else he liked. And so one day he just suddenly said, "We'll call it quits." And I thought it was quits. And he started dating different ones. And he had a cousin that was a good friend of mine. We all went to the same school. And his first cousin, he'd worked with her to get me. And she invited me to spend the weekend with her. And I did, not knowing he'd be there. And so he made an appearance, and I didn't pay any attention to him. I let him know he couldn't use me. And that sort of set him back. And so we went on, and in 1917, when the war broke out in Germany, he was drafted. He was one of the first four from Bleckley County that was drafted. So he was at Camp Wheeler, which was about 4 or 5 miles out from Macon. And finally, they was going to send him to France. So he wrote me a letter, and I answered it, and that set him off then. He we had a box supper at school. You don't know what that is. Each one would cook a meal, put fruit, cook maybe a apple tart, or I forgot, fry some chicken, put it in a box, and we had the box decorated. And he found out which was my box. By that time, I had another boyfriend, and they were both there that night. And he started, they auctioned off the boxes. They won't get bids, and so Lucian's brother, his name was Lucian also. His brother-in-law was kind of egging it on, and they were our next-door neighbors too. And his brother-in-law kept egging him on, and he kept bidding on my box, and the other boyfriend was bidding too. But Lucian was in the army at that time, and he had a little bit of money, not much, but he had more than the other fella had. I remember the other fella saying that Berry Hill boy was there with a few dimes more. Oh, gosh. And from then on, he went to, as I said, he was the first boy in the army, and he had to go to France. And he lived in the trenches over there. They had, in France, they had trenches. And he said he walked and slept in mud most of the time. And he was out on the battlefield just 1 month before the war ended. And high explosive shell burst in front of him and took both eyes out. He was struck on this cheek right along here, and a piece of shrapnel went through his head right along here. He had a scar and come out, but it didn't go low enough to hit his brain. So after the battle was over, the ones that come by picking up the wounded came by, and he was not knocked unconscious. And they looked at him and they said, well, we may as well leave this one here. Ain't no need of taking him back, because his whole face was gone just about it. And he was still conscious. He said, don't you leave me here, take me back. And they did. They took him back. And that was just 1 month to the day before the war was over. It was the 11th of October, and the war was over the 11th of November. And let me see. We knew he'd been wounded because we didn't get any messages from him. And couldn't. But all we thought about was something had happened to his hand that he couldn't write. We didn't know how he had been wounded until the first of the year, after Christmas. And he came home and had to go back to Baltimore, which was a good distance then. And his daddy went with him, and he had to have his eyes operated on and be fitted with artificial eyes. But he never could wear those eyes very well. They would get dry and his eyelids would stick to them. But he wore dark glasses all the time. And I remember the first time he went to the barber shop and had to take off his glasses to get a shave. and the barber said, "This just gets next to me." But he was a jovial person. He was the life of the party wherever he went. Your dad is more like him than Lucian is. Lucian's more quiet than Bob is. Bob is more outgoing. Well, his daddy was that outgoing type too. And he had a lot of friends. And when he come back, we had already decided before he left that we'd get married when he come back. But my daddy couldn't see it that way. He said, well, if you were to get sick, he couldn't even give you a drink of water. Well, I couldn't see it his way either. I knew I'd manage some way. I said, don't worry about a drink of water. I'll get a drink of water. But my daddy didn't want me to get married anyway. But he had it all figured out. If my daddy tried to keep me from going with him, he had it figured out that he'd disappear and let it be known around in the community that he'd gone back to Baltimore. And but my daddy didn't. He told me, he says, if you marry him, you're not going to be any part of me anymore. I said, well, that's all right. And so we got married, and our cousins had to drive the car, and they were the only two witnesses we had. And when we got back, he had bought a car himself, a Chevrolet. Chevrolets had just come on the market. And he bought one, but he couldn't drive it. So his daddy or his brother would have to bring him when he'd come to see me, and they'd leave him and come back and pick him up. Oh, and so he wanted me to learn to drive, and so his daddy taught me to drive, and we were living with them at the time, with his mother and father. And I guess I was driving in 2 or 3 weeks, just on a short country road. So one day, his mother and daddy wanted to go to Macon, and his daddy had a Ford, Model A Ford. It was altogether different from the Chevrolet. Chevrolet had a shift gear. Well, this Ford had a foot gear. And Lucian, every day he wanted to get out and ride around someplace. And he said, let's go out. I said, Lucian, you know I can't drive that Ford. He said, oh, I'll show you how. And we did. We went down to my mother's, and I drove it. And but in the meantime, my daddy had reconciled. He saw his mistake, and he loved Lucian like one of his own kids. He saw altogether different. And so we come back, and I was used to putting on the brakes in that Chevrolet. Well, I wasn't thinking. I slept on and shot through the end of the garage. Oh. But let me see what happened next. Oh, we moved. His mother and he had a little spat one day. Mr. Berryhill was that happy-go-lucky type of person, and so Lucian decided, well, we better move out. He wanted to get up in the middle of the night and leave. I said, no, no, no. And we moved into a little 2-room, I reckon 3-room apartment. And then we built a little house out in front of. You never have been to the old home place, have you? No. Well, it was a rather big house, because it had a lot of things, and his grandfather was a cootie, and he did quite well. He bought up a lot of land. In fact, he had 12 children, and he left each one of them 100 acres of land, except one that he lived with. He left 200 acres of land. So we built this little house, and Lucian's brother and in the meantime, had married my sister. And he wanted to give his brother a job, so there was a meat market opened up in town, come on the market for sale, and Lucian bought it and hired one of his cousins to, and back then you had to go out and slaughter hogs, or slaughter cows, or whatever you had to sell in the meat market. And he was making a living at it. We saved, but in the meantime he was receiving $100 a month compensation. That's what the government paid him. And he was making a living in that meat market and saving his pension money. And a house came on sale in the edge of town, and he bought it, had it torn down, and built us a house there. That house is still standing. That's where your daddy was born, in Cochran. And but eventually the cousin that was working in the meat market for him, decided he wanted the market for himself. So he wanted to buy it from Lucian, and Lucian said, well, I don't know anybody else to get that I can trust to operate this market for me. So he sold it to him. And we lived, and your Uncle Lucian was 2 years old at the time. And gosh, let me see. We lived there until he died. He had gallbladder trouble. He'd have an attack of gallbladder, and finally he had a very serious attack and got yellow jaundice. His bile ducts were blocked, and it all went out, and he had yellow jaundice. Well, they had to clear that up before they could operate on him. And we had to wait, I think it took about 2 weeks to get it cleared up enough that they thought they could operate. So they took him to the Macon Hospital, and he had to stay there a week before they operated on him. And he had to have a tube coming from his incision and draining the bile out into a jug. And at the morning that he died, he wanted me to go to Cochran, which was 40 miles from Macon. And Irene was a nurse at the time. That was his niece. And Marika knows Irene. So she went with me, and my son Lucian was staying at my daddy's while I was staying in the making it. I rented a room, and Bobby was 8 months old. I had to have a little colored girl. She's the one that had been with me for come and take the kids out to walk and stay with them. And so she kept Bobby while I went to Cochran and back then the banks were all closing, all being, I was in 1932. And so the banks were all closing. It was the beginning of the Depression. And we had rented a safe deposit box. And I went and got some things out of the box while I was there. And it was about 8 o'clock at night before Irene and I got back to the hospital. And they had taken the tube out that morning, but all that bile went back into his system, and he actually bled to death. I know that's what it was because you could look at the bandages it was on his, and they were soaking in blood. That's how he died. Well, I had it. He had thought all the time. In the meantime, they had raised his pension to $200 a month. Well, he had $57. He had a $20,000 insurance policy, but he'd been drawing $57.50 a month on that for 13 and a half years, so he only had 6.5 more years to go before that'd be out. Well, that insurance policy, that $57.50, was all I had to live on after he died. He thought I would still get his pension, but I didn't. They said his death was not service-connected. So, it was hard going for a while. I took in some boarders, and they gave me a little job of taking the business census, I guess. Well, people didn't want you prying into their business. They didn't want you knowing what they were doing. And in the meantime, one of the boarders I had was Carl Vinson's aunt. And you probably don't know who Carl Vinson was, but he was a senator. And he come out and talked to me and tried to get a pension for me. And finally I did get $35 a month. But I'd already gone and took a beauty course and was operating a beauty shop. I had to borrow $1,000. I had to sell some of my furniture to get money to take the beauty course. And I had to borrow $1,000. Anyway, this lady from Hawkinsville, which was 10 miles away from Cochran, had a beauty shop for sale. And she come to the beauty school where I was and wanted to know if there was anybody interested in a shop in Hawkinsville. Well, it was in my neighborhood. I said, well, if you'll agree to keep it open and I can borrow enough money, I'll run the risk of getting it. So she agreed to, and so I remember that I was scared to death. First day I took over the shop, I had one permanent to give that day, and back then shampoo and set was 50 cents. Permanents was $3 and a half. So it took me nearly all day to give that permanent because I was so new at it. I haven't given but 2 or 3 before. And my sister was one of them that I had given it to, Annette, my sister Annette. And we had to go to Valdosta to take our state board examination, and I took her with me to work on to get my license. And coming back from Valdosta that night, right in the middle of Cordele, I had a blowout and almost ran off the road. Things are so big I can't remember, but I know I had to go to the place and buy a new tire. But that was, I got ahead of my story about the beauty shop. But anyway, back then, they say in Cochran and Hawkinsville was 10 miles apart. Well, they were giving in curls, what they call in curls, but they'd wear the hair long, and they just want a little curl in the end so it would turn up. And it was $2. So one day I says, I'm giving no more in curls. I says, I'll tell you right now, every one of those ends has got a root to it. I said, I'm not giving any more $2 curls. Haircuts were a quarter. And I remember one customer came in, and she happened to be a cousin of Lucian's. And I was giving her a haircut, She didn't tell me about a little mole on the back of her neck. Now, I had grown down over it. I was using the electric clippers and clipped the mole off. Oh, it started bleeding, and I didn't know what to do. But she understood. I told her, I said, you should have let me know you had that mole back. I couldn't see. And, but she didn't do anything about it, and so I went on. Things got a little better. I made pretty good in the shop. Finally, this farm came up for sale. Lucian, in the meantime, was graduating from high school. Well, I wanted him to go to college. He didn't want to go. But he decided he'd go anyway. And he went to Abraham Balcom, which was agricultural college. He was like my daddy and his other granddaddy. He wanted to be a farmer. Well, I bought this farm, and I soon learned he didn't know how to farm. In the meantime, this farm had 400 pecan trees on it. Had 400 acres. Oh gosh, there's so much.
There's a lot to do. Have to come back on the next day off.
But in the meantime, Lucian got married. He and Bessie Lou got married. They lived with me for 1 year. And he didn't know how to farm, and so he got a job. I forgot what his first job was, but it was going in grocery stores and delivering. I forgot what. And then the Armstrong Cork opened up in Macon. And he went up there and applied. He was I think the first few that had applied, and they gave him a job there, so that paid him pretty good. They moved out. They lived with me a while, and they moved out on their own. They had 2 children right away, Betsy and David, a little boy. And the little boy, they were going I had bought a beauty shop in Warner Robins for them. And they had gone home for lunch, and she had forgot her sister and her niece had come in the meantime and was going to eat lunch with them. And when they got home, she discovered she didn't have any butter. And her niece says, well, I'll go and get some. And she went out the front door to get in the car to back out, and David, the little boy, was 5.5 years old. We think he ran out the back door and come up as she backed out, and she backed out over him and killed him. He was 5.5 years old. Well, that, of course, devastated all of us. But in the meantime, I had moved to Macon and bought a shop there. I don't know if I've already told you that or not. I've told you so much. And so I was doing pretty good with that shop. But, I had taken out this insurance policy on Betsy and David. So, if anything happened, they'd be able to go to college. And so when he was killed, I had this double indemnity, and it paid me $2,000. And when I left Macon and moved to California, them who was the good ones and who was the bad ones. Did they get into trouble? Some you think there's a perfect one? They all got into trouble. Two of them, though, were babies when they died. So the oldest one and the third one.
Lucian is the oldest?
Lucian, huh?
Lucian is the oldest?
No, Wallace was the oldest one.
He died.
And then the third one was Floyd. James Floyd. My maiden name was Floyd. And who taught you to drive in the house? My father-in-law and my brother-in-law. My father-in-law, I guess, was the first one that taught me. My wedding was just nothing but just going to the preacher's house and sitting in the car, and I had two cousins with me, and it was raining, and the preacher came out to the car, and and let's see what else. Well, they were all good sometime and all bad sometime. Yeah, they got into trouble. Lucian wrecked my car one night, and Bob got off on the wrong foot. When I moved to Macon, he got in with a little boy that had a go-kart and everything. They was into everything that they shouldn't have been into. I had to threaten him a few times to straighten him up. They didn't have any difficulties in school, and I don't know who the first dates were. And the jobs I've had, first job, I guess, was in 1933, I guess. It was during the Depression, and took the business census in Cochran. That's where we were living at the time. That was 2 years after my husband died, and I had a couple of boarders, a lady and her daughter, and I guess they were the ones that caused me to get the job of taking the business census. And believe it or not, the most prominent people in the town hadn't paid taxes in a long time. The ones that didn't have much was ones that were paying the taxes. Asking I believe I've already. Someone told you used to work in a beauty shop. Please tell us what that was like for you. I not only worked in it, I owned it. I believe I already told you that. And for 25 years, I worked in the beauty shop. And when my sister Mary moved to California, they wanted me to come out there. So I sold my house and my beauty shop and went to California in 1957. I had 6 apartments out there that I rented. In the summer, I rented to tourists that come to the beach. I was in a block of the beach. And in the summer, I rented to tourists. They come from all over. I had people from Minnesota, from all over the country, from Texas and from Arizona. They'd come in the summer to stay at the beach, and they'd rent an apartment from me. And in the winter, I rented to school teachers. I had teachers from all over too, and 2 ladies from Minnesota rented one of my apartments, and so then my daddy got sick, and I come home to stay while he was in the hospital, and he died, and my mother was by herself except for one son. So I decided I'd just sell the apartments. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, was from Egypt, and he was in the real estate business, and he sold the apartments for me. He bought them for me in the first place, and so I just moved back to Macon. Then I started working in a flower shop. Irene's husband and Irene owned a flower shop and a restaurant. It was all in the same building, but it had a petition, and it was right across the street from the Macon Hospital. So they had a lot of people coming in from the hospital to eat and to buy flowers and what have you. In the first place, he was in the hospital, in the lobby, and they complained so about him getting all the business until they made him get out of the hospital with his flower shop. All the florists started complaining that he was getting all the business. He and Irene, that was my husband's niece, didn't have any children. You remember Irene? You've been there and eating all while I was working there. Well, let me think. I can think of things that happened way back better than I can recent things. So they all got scared for Irene and I to live. Her husband died, and she wanted me to come live with her. And so I lived with her for almost 10 years. And then everybody began to get scared, Bob and Lucian, for us to stay there by ourselves, because a lot of unsavory people started moving in around us. And they'd be out in the street parading and dancing around at midnight. We couldn't hear too much of what was going on because her house was set a good distance back off the street. But and she had a woman that come and cleaned house for her once a week. And come to find out, that black woman found her checkbook. She had more than one checkbook, but she found one of Irene's canceled checks and got the signature off of it, and got one of her checkbooks and went to the bank, and Irene began to get checks that she knew she hadn't written. She went to the bank and checked on it, and there stood that colored woman at the desk in the bank writing a check, and she had written about $900 worth of checks. So they got afraid for us to stay there by ourselves. And that's when I went to Bob's and Sue's in there before they moved down to the lake. And that about takes care of everything. Let me see what else you wanted to know. Did I have any pets growing up? Yeah, a cat. What was farm life like? Not good, I'll tell you, in the beginning. I believe I already told you. There's something about what that was like. Oh, I didn't have any of the latest technological of marvel of the day. That was way back before any of that was ever heard of. How many grandchildren did you first have? Well, Betsy, and my first grandson was killed in an automobile accident. How did it damage that? We didn't move much. We moved to where we always lived when I was 4 years old, and I remember the day we moved. Well, Bob, Lucian's first job was working in a grocery store is I reckon just doing whatever needed to be done. And Bob's first job was working at a dry goods store. And they tried to keep him there. They didn't want him to go to college. They wanted him to still work in that store. I said, no way. Lucian, I couldn't get him to go. He went 1 quarter to call Abraham Baldwin, which is a agricultural college. All he was interested in was getting out and planting, and but I soon found out that wasn't going to work either. he liked part of the work and part of it he didn't. Well, as anybody that's ever lived on a farm. So he started, when Armstrong Court come to Macon and opened up a building, they furnished all kinds of building materials. Well, he went and applied for a job, and he was the 31st one hired after they opened the place. So he worked there until he retired. When he was 60 years old. And he wished after he retired that he hadn't retired right then. Oh, if I had it, I don't know what all I'd do different. I'd do some things different, though. If I had to go over. I believe I told Shirley that I won't be here. I'm going down to Betsy's. She lives in Bonaire, Georgia, and they are having I don't know what they're having for me on my birthday. But anyway, I'll find out, I guess, when we come this weekend. And I won't be back here, up here, until the middle of May, if I'm still around. So I guess that's about all I know. He said my first grandchildren. They were my first. And then they had, when Betsy was 9 years old, Sue was born. And she's married to a famous lawyer in Albany. And Gary is their youngest one, and he's kind of a manager like of I forgot what, kind of a making bottlers, glass work, and I forgot the name of the country now, the company. And you know about Patty and Paul, and they were born in
What about Dad?
Paul. Where was he? He was born in New.
What about Dad's service during the war?
Huh?
What about Dad's service during the war? What do you remember about that?
Great grandchildren.
What do you?
These hearing aids are just aids. They're not perfect.
What do you remember about Dad's service during the war?
About your daddy?
Yeah.
Oh, he, when he finished college, oh, he was going to enlist for 4 years in the beginning. And when the 4 years was out, he didn't know what to do. He decided to sign up for 4 more years. And continued on with it until he retired, I guess. Shirley can tell you more about that than I can.
But Shelley ain't under your own.
That's true.
He,
Shelley told me to get
you'll have to get him to tell you about all the ice storms and everything he was in. I imagine he's told you already, hasn't he?
Yeah, he said lots of long-winded stories, half are believable, half aren't. Oh, Monsters went to Germany. What was it like?
Yeah, that's right. I went to Germany and stayed 2 months, I think. 2 months. And I went on a lot of trips there. We went to Sweden and Norway and Denmark and then I took off by myself once to go on a tour, and we got behind a caravan, soldiers moving, about 15 cars in front of us, and we couldn't get around. I was supposed to meet a crowd in a certain place, and I was the only one on the bus that could speak English. And I said, I come to this place, in-farts and out-farts. That's what they called, that's what roads was called. And I said, if they quit farting around, I could get where I was going. Oh. But when I finally got there, 3 or 4 hours late, I just knew everybody'd be gone and I'd be stranded there and couldn't speak a word of what I couldn't understand, but just a few words of what they were talking about. And I was the only one that could speak English, but they were waiting for me. So we went through, oh gosh, where all did we go? About 10 different countries. And then, oh, I didn't tell you about my accident either. there was a couple of girls in Macon. That was in 1965, I guess, 63. And they advertised in the paper for somebody to go to California with them. Well, I said, I answered the ad. And they come out and interviewed me. And so I had bought a new Cutlass Oldsmobile, and they had a Ford, and we were going to take off to California. And we did, and went to Las Vegas and went all to Grand Canyon and one of the girls, they could only one of the girls drive, the other one couldn't drive. So Lucy was the one that could drive, and while we were at the Grand Canyon, she stepped off the curb and sprained her ankle and couldn't walk. So I had to do all the driving. And we headed back to home, and in Albuquerque, four cars back of me run into the cars and pushed all four of them into me in the back of my car. And luckily, I put on brakes and just did touch the car in front of me. Didn't do any damage at all, but it squashed my car. My new car burst the radiator. And I ended up in the hospital in Albuquerque. Well, this old doctor that caused all the accident, he was I forgot what kind of, anyway, people that treated you, he come up and wanted me to go to his clinic. I said, no way am I going to your clinic. Call Bob. He was flying all around. Shirley remembers this. I called him and told him to come get me. He said, where are you? He was in Texas. I said, I'm in the hospital in Albuquerque. But I wasn't thinking, I guess. I thought he could just get in the plane and fly wherever he wanted to go. So he came, he flew out there and drove my car back. And I stayed there for 2 months. And then I drove from there back to Macon by myself. And what was the place you all lived in Texas where he was?
Conference Coast?
Yeah. So I guess that about takes in as much of it.
Any other ideas? Any other?
So I've had some ups and downs.
Yeah.
And I guess there's been a lot that I hadn't thought of.
Come across that again another time.
Did I tell you that I won't be here after this weekend? I know I told your mother. Marika's going to Italy, and he gone to middle of May. So that takes it all in that I can think of. Well, I wouldn't buy that farm for one thing. I sure wouldn't do that. And I don't think I'd sell my beauty shop in Hawkinsville. I'd hold on to that. I wouldn't go to work in Warner Robins when the war broke out.
Why wouldn't you sell your shop?
Huh?
Why would you hold on to the beauty shop instead of selling it?
Well, I was making good in it, and I give it up. So, so if you ever strike anything good, think twice before you give it up.